Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 2 waiver wire targets. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about the waiver wire targets for the running back, wide receiver, quarterback, tight end, and defensive positions going into Week 2 of the 2019 fantasy football season. Yes, Week 1 was extremely entertaining, unpredictable, predictable at some times, but oh my goodness, there's a lot to talk about, so that's exactly what we're going to do today. Also, at the end of the episode, I'm going to be going over what exactly I learned from Week 1 from every single team. We're going to talk about all 28 teams that played on Sunday and my lessons that I learned from every single team and little tidbits that we can take away going into the rest of the 2019 season. Now, before we begin today's episode, let me remind all of you to click that subscribe button, join the community, get us to 8,000 subscribers. If you haven't yet already, click that bell notification button to know when my latest content is out and also know when I live stream. Sometimes there's impromptu live streams that come out of nowhere. Sometimes I'll let you know in a video prior, but usually, they're sometimes random. Also, what's up, guys? How's it going? All right, so if you also haven't checked out my Patreon, the link is down in the description for those of you who are interested. But let's get right into it, right? We have a lot to talk about today and really not enough time to get it all out, but we're going to try our very best here. We're going to talk about our Week 2 running back targets in order to give you guys an idea on who you should be targeting in the waiver wire. Now, I have a list of 1 through 8 to the left of me. To be honest, I've numbered them 1 through 8. In my opinion, that should be the priority in which they are kind of sought after, but you might have differing opinions, and you can go for these guys in any way. There are going to be names that may be available in your league, but typically these are names that are less owned and typically aren't owned in 12-team leagues. For those of you who play in 10 or 8-team leagues, for sure none of these guys are owned, and typically you might not even need them, but there might be names here that seek interest for, giving yourself an extra layer of depth on your bench. So picking these guys up may not be a bad idea. So let's go through 1 through 8. Let's talk about each of these players. Number 1, Devin Singletary. I wanted to mention Devin Singletary because he had a great week. Besides the fact that he pretty much dominated the offensive snap counts in terms of all of the running backs. He outsnapped Frank Gore and TJ Yeldon. TJ Yeldon really didn't do anything. I know he's probably owned in your league already for those of you who play in a 12-team league, but I want to go ahead and re-mention it. Please pick up Devin Singletary. He is the starting running back of the Buffalo Bills now that LaShawn McCoy is gone. Frank Gore sure got himself some touches, got some work on the ground, but that is only for a little amount of time until Devin Singletary pretty much takes over this job and runs away with it. He had like 4 rushes for 70-plus yards, some insane number. Got some work in the passing game, which according to their game script this week, they were down a lot of points to the Jets early, so majority of it had to do with the passing game and him being implemented that way. So that's always an upside in terms of fantasy value. So Devin Singletary, that's the first guy I wanted to mention today. He's a guy that for sure should be rostered and potentially started as the weeks go on. They play against the New York Giants this coming week, the Buffalo Bills do, and it's a pretty juicy matchup after we saw what the Dallas Cowboys were able to do and pick apart that defense. All right, the number 2 running back that I wanted to mention this week is Malcolm Brown of the Los Angeles Rams. Oh my goodness. Okay, so let's talk about the Los Angeles Rams. I'll go into Todd Gurley details later when I talk about the lessons I learned from every team and tidbits. But as we all know, Malcolm Brown had 2 rushing touchdowns and had over 10 rushing attempts on Sunday's game against the Carolina Panthers. The way it looks is that Todd Gurley, sure, he could still run. He had over 100 yards rushing, but they're not looking to feed him the ball as the primetime workhorse back. They want to split the backfield, and from what we all thought, Darrell Henderson was going to be the guy that is the number 2 running back on this team, or potentially splitting snaps with him this offseason. Darrell Henderson is nowhere to be found, and it is Malcolm Brown, the CJ Anderson, Jr. of this offense, a guy that got all of the red zone work in terms of rushing, and looked good on his own accord. So to be honest, for those of you who own Todd Gurley, I would for sure pick up Malcolm Brown. If you don't own Todd Gurley, if Malcolm Brown is given this kind of red zone opportunity on a weekly basis, sure, there will be a week where Malcolm Brown doesn't score, but as a flex option, considering all of the other duds that did occur this week, Malcolm Brown, for my dollar, seems like a pretty safe bet in an offense that scored 30 points, but looked to have struggled to get to that 30 mark. Imagine struggling to 30 points. Like, that's pretty ridiculous for the Rams. Scoring that much, it's not uncommon, but they didn't look as crisp as they usually did. But Malcolm Brown, for sure, a guy that I like as a handcuff with upside, especially if they're going to split carries and the red zone work is up for grabs. It's not a bad idea. Moving on to my number 3 running back option, Raheem Mostert. Here's the thing. Tevin Coleman sprained his ankle, was out early. Matt Breida went to the locker room early in the first quarter. What a surprise. The 49ers running backs cannot stay healthy. Plain and simple. I mean, it's ridiculous. Jerick McKinnon, Matt Breida with injury history, Tevin Coleman banged up already. Raheem Mostert at the end of last season, I think broke his arm to end his season. I think he had a break somewhere, whether it was leg or arm. I do not recall. But Raheem Mostert, as of right now, I mean, the way it looked, Matt Breida is not getting any touches. For those of you who played Matt Breida this last week, assuming that he was going to be the number 1 back because of what the unofficial depth chart said, I thought Tevin Coleman was going to be the guy. He seemed to be that until he got injured. Breida, again, injured again. So Raheem Mostert is a guy that I want to look for in terms of maybe putting him in my flex position or just having some bench depth at the running back position, a guy that, to be honest, looked good on Sunday against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense. So I'm excited about that going forward. If Coleman's out for a while, McKinnon's not coming back there's a possibility that Jeff Wilson Jr. could get some touches. But as of right now, Mostert is a guy that I want to keep my eye on, and another running back that has an opportunity going forward in the 49ers backfield. Moving on to my number 4 running back of the week. Okay, so I want to go ahead and talk to you guys about this. If you have not heard yet, Darius Geis had an MRI on the other knee, not the one that he tore his ACL with last season. He had an MRI on the other knee yesterday after the game. As of right now, they're not giving us much information other than he had had the MRI. It's not looking good. Chances are that either Darius Geis is going to miss some time, or potentially it's a much worse injury and his season's over. That being said, Adrian Peterson was inactive because of a healthy scratch. The way this backfield looks, they have Adrian Peterson, they have Wendell Smallwood, and they have Chris Thompson. Chris Thompson yesterday in this offense with Case Keenum, McLaurin, Trey Quinn, Vernon Davis, they were a pass-heavy machine against the Eagles secondary that could not stop a soul. Chris Thompson is a guy that, if he continues to get work in the passing game, absolutely should have some value in fantasy, especially in PPR format. So I do not mind that whatsoever. For those of you looking, it's pretty much a Duke Johnson option. That's literally what he is. He's the Duke Johnson of this offense. He's going to get third down work. He sometimes will get some touches on the ground. He had 3 rushing attempts, but really that team did not run the ball well against the Eagles front 7, which kind of gives me concern for Devontae Freeman coming into this week. But Chris Thompson, guy you guys should look out for. Moving on to number 5, Giovani Bernard, a guy I really wanted to kind of point out to you guys because of the fact that Joe Mixon has an ankle injury. According to what I've been told or what I read, Joe Mixon sprained his ankle in the game yesterday, was pulled. Giovani Bernard came in, looked pretty good, had about almost 8 points in half PPR scoring formats in fantasy. Giovani Bernard was just given a pretty big contract the other day, interestingly enough, and I was completely flabbergasted because who the heck wants to give Giovani Bernard a sizable contract as a guy that really didn't see the field very much last season unless Joe Mixon was injured in those 2 weeks from when he had that knee scope surgery. So as of right now, if Joe Mixon isn't going to play, perhaps, we don't know exactly the details on what's going to happen, but if Joe Mixon is out, the way I see it, Giovani Bernard going into week 2 and on could be a potential good play. If we go and look at what Giovani Bernard was capable of producing with the Cincinnati Bengals last season in the early part, I think it was in week 3 and 4 that he participated as the starting running back, had almost all of the snaps there. A lot of work in the passing game. This offense in September has always been good. Andy Dalton is a good quarterback in September. Going forward, it gets a little tricky, but from what we were able to see this week, there's a lot of promising talent in that offense, a lot of high-scoring affairs going down. So Giovani Bernard's a guy that is a pretty decent target going forward for those of you who are Joe Mixon owners for sure. All right, moving on to number 6, Ronald Jones. Okay, here's the thing about Ronald Jones. The running back committee that exists in the Tampa Bay backfield as it exists right now is a little tricky. And here's why. Peyton Barber was the starter last season. Ronald Jones was the rookie. Came in, wasn't able to really get any traction in this backfield or in this offense. This entire preseason, there's been the conversation, who is going to win the backfield and who is truly the better back between the two. Yesterday, we saw a little bit of progression in that competition, and we really saw Ronald Jones take steps forward into becoming the lead back for this team, who he should be. I mean, he is the more talented back overall, and he fits this scheme even better than a guy like Peyton Barber, because Peyton Barber is a bruising back. He's a downhill runner that just wants to run in between the tackles and punish linebackers that don't tackle or have much strength behind their shoulder pads. A guy like Ronald Jones can work in the passing game, can make big runs, can play off tackle, can even run in between the tackles. The way I see it, the fact that he was able to get more rushing attempts than Peyton Barber last night, same thing. I think it was a morning or afternoon game. He had about 13 rushing attempts to Peyton Barber's 8. That is something that I like to see. That is promising. And I think there's a potential that Ronald Jones, moving forward, could see more attempts. They have a short week. They play against the Carolina Panthers this coming week, so there's an opportunity for him there to potentially continue to make some moves and move his name up the depth chart. So that for sure is a name that I'm looking for, Ronald Jones. Moving on to number 7, Rex Burkhead. All right, so for those of you who are aware, Sony Michel had 15 rushing attempts last night. Pretty good, usage for 14 yards. Yeah. Yep. 14 yards. Okay, so now that we've gotten that out of the way, James White, still good usage. Rex Burkhead got some good usage, especially in the passing game. The way it looks, Rex Burkhead going into week 2, playing against the Miami Dolphins defense. We want it for the rest of the season. Play anybody who plays the Dolphins defense. I said that in week 1. You want to play everyone against this defense because the Dolphins just gave up all of their pieces. And we saw Lamar Jackson, Mark Ingram, Mark Andrews, Marquise Brown did. I didn't think it was going to go to that extent. I really thought it was going to be a running affair, but oh my goodness. Even the secondary of the Dolphins were victims yesterday. 59 points. That's the highest the Falcons. The Ravens have scored in franchise history. Incredible. That being said, we're talking about the Patriots, a team that blew out their opposing team. Going into Miami this week, Rex Burkhead could see a lot of potential, opportunity this week, especially in a game that's going to be a blowout. So as of right now, Rex Burkhead's a guy that I'd like to pick up and maybe potentially play him in the flex this coming week. Moving on to my last running back option. There are other guys, absolutely, that could be named on this list, but I really still want to name DeSean Jackson because of the fact that Austin Ekeler had an incredible week. Right, it had a lot of people saying, who the heck is Melvin Gordon? Why do you need Melvin Gordon? Why do you have to pay him so much money when all you can do is just give the ball to Austin Ekeler and he can find just as much, if not more, success within this offense? The offensive line played well. Phillip Rivers, the receiving core played well. And the way it looked is, okay, Austin Ekeler is the future of this backfield. That being said, if an injury is to take place, DeSean Jackson is the immediate handcuff, guys. We need to go ahead and grab that. Also, DeSean Jackson does get work. Sure, it may have been an 80-20 kind of split yesterday, but expect them to try to scale back Austin Ekeler's touches in order to make sure that he's healthy for the rest of the season. All right, those are the running backs that I wanted to mention this week. If you have any other ones, go down below. Let me know what you guys think of other running backs. Potentially, there's other guys that I probably missed, but they're probably more owned in normal fantasy leagues than most. And then there might be some sleepers, hidden sitting around. Anyway, let's go ahead and move on. I want to talk about the wide receiver position because, boy, the wide receiver position this week was incredible. When I mean incredible, I mean extremely unpredictable because the speed was the number one factor. Speed killed this week. A lot of secondaries were just victims of the speedy wide receivers that in the past have been very inconsistent and very volatile in fantasy football. This week, they showed up and they showed out, and it was incredible. Just before we begin, I have 8 names to the left of me. Actually, I have more. I have 10 names because really there were a lot of wide receivers. Sammy Watkins is not on this list for a reason. Sammy Watkins should already be owned. He should already be owned in your league. If he's not, then you absolutely need to get him because Tyreek Hill will be out for a significant amount of time, potentially 2 to 3, maybe even 4 weeks because of that shoulder injury. I don't know what extent. They said he had some sort of, he went to the hospital, went to some trauma care. As of right now, Sammy Watkins is the number 1 wide receiver of that team, so he needs to be owned without a doubt. But typically, he should be owned in all of your leagues already. Now, moving on, let's talk about my top 8 wide receivers for this, wide receiver targets for this coming week. Number 1 is DeSean Jackson. I was looking at his percentage owned. He's only owned in about 60% of Yahoo leagues. That's got to change, guys. That's got to change. Without a doubt, that has to be different. DeSean Jackson was unbelievable. Listen, I was going to say who would have guessed, but there were people making noise about DeSean Jackson this offseason. There's a reason why the Philadelphia Eagles went and got a guy like Mike Wallace last year, who eventually broke his leg and wasn't able to perform for that team. There was a reason why they had a guy like that. They wanted someone that could take the top off the defense to go ahead and alleviate pressure off of a guy like Alshon Jeffrey. We saw what Alshon Jeffrey was able to do with the combination of DeSean Jackson on the other side of the field. Both of them with 2 receiving touchdowns just yesterday. Incredible. Sure, the Eagles offense, it looked to really be... there were 2 different teams, the first half Eagles and then the second half Eagles. And DeSean Jackson was the big difference in which caught this team over the hump and got them the W this week. He's a guy that should be played going forward. If you're going to get 10 targets as the number 2 wide receiver of this team and you're going to have a lot of upside to potentially take the top off the defense and score touchdowns, you are absolutely fantasy relevant. DeSean Jackson, my number 1 guy to target this week. Moving on to number 2 at the wide receiver position, John Ross. Gosh, here I'm telling you, the key is speed. These guys that I'm naming, they're all speedsters. John Ross, a guy that really his rookie year injured, didn't do anything. Last season was the number 3 wide receiver on this team. Still was a healthy scratch at times. Only really got any of his work when AJ Green went down, and even then the guy was catching 1 or 2 passes a game and 1 touchdown, and he was scoring 6, 7, 8 fantasy points on a week, maybe, and then the other week it would be garbage. Oh my goodness. John Ross came out, 10 plus targets, took the top off of the opposing defense, which was the Seattle Seahawks, who have looked good defensively, and man, they gave the Seahawks everything that they could handle offensively and defensively. The Bengals were a different team than I expected them to come out as, and John Ross was a main difference on the offense, with literally no running game from Joe Mixon in that entire first half plus. The contributions of John Ross, Tyler Boyd, CJ Uzomah, those guys, and Andy Dalton, of course, in this offensive line, who I'm telling you is better than you guys think, really made a difference, and I'm really surprised that John Ross was able to do that, and he should for sure be a waiver wire pickup until AJ Green's back, and we don't know when that's going to be. It could be another 4 weeks. Either way, John Ross is going to be contributing in this offense. If he continues to get that many targets, it's money. Moving on to number 3, Marquise Brown. Now, here's my thought process. Marquise Brown, sure, he caught his first 2 passes for touchdowns, deep ball threat against a very bad defense. Now, the question is, was it the Miami Dolphins that were really bad, or was it the Baltimore Ravens that were really good? We're not going to know until next week. And looking at week 2 schedule, give me a second. Oh, goodness. I got some posters here. Okay, look at where's the Ravens at? The Ravens play the Cardinals. Good matchup. Then the Ravens, the following week after that, play the Kansas City Chiefs. So in terms of what Marquise Brown has capable in the next couple of weeks, like the opportunity that he's going to be set up with is golden. He needs to be picked up in your league if he's not already rostered. A guy that has played with good quarterbacks in the past, has dealt with injury, but this offseason, got past the rehab, finally got on the field, and just he punished the secondary consistently, and was a huge contributor in fantasy. I don't know how many people started him, perhaps in a DFS format, but outside of that, Marquise Brown, wow. Incredible, to be honest. That entire offense for the Ravens was just stupendous, all in all. But Marquise Brown, a guy that going forward, if you find a connection there between Lamar Jackson and him as the number one wide receiver, it could really be great for fantasy purposes. So that's my number 3 wide receiver. Number 4, Jamison Crowder. Guys, it's insane, but it's not really. Okay, this is how the Jets offense wants to work. Sam Darnold requires to get into a rhythm. In order for him to be efficient and be good as a quarterback in the NFL, he needs to warm up. He needs to get into a rhythm, and that's what Jamison Crowder's for. In years past, Quincy Enunwa has been that. Last year, to start the season, Quincy Enunwa played in the slot position, and he was the main target of Sam Darnold to warm him up and to get this offense moving in this West Coast kind of style. To be honest, Jamison Crowder is a better slot. Sure, the last 2 seasons with the Redskins have been poor because of the quarterback play, etc. Jamison Crowder was incredible. 14 catches, almost 100 receiving yards, no touchdown, but nearly, 18 fantasy points in half PPR scoring formats. Jamison Crowder, incredible. I had him as my wide receiver 3 in a couple leagues. Had him in the Scott Fish Bowl. The dude balled out this week against a pretty good pass-heavy stopping defense. So as of right now, Jamison Crowder, a great guy. As of right now, the way it looks, Le'Veon Bell, Jamison Crowder. That is the Jets' offense. Robbie Anderson was rendered worthless because Tre'Davious White following him and then holding him down, and then just struggles from the offense as a whole. But Jamison Crowder, incredible week, and wow, that was really good going against Cleveland. Next week could find some more success there if he's continued to be targeted as much as he did. Moving on to number 5. Really quickly, I'm not trying to say, hey, I called it. No, that's not the case. Because for as many times as I'll call out and say, hey, this guy's going to be good, I'll turn around and say this guy's going to be bad, and Derrick Henry puts me in my grave, right? So Amendola, Brown, these are guys that, yes, I mentioned on Friday's episode, Hidden Gems. I'm telling you guys, these are hidden players that are going to be very much so utilized in their respective offenses. Had great weeks respectively. Both found the end zone. Both were heavily targeted and were great all in all. And I can't be more excited about these 2 players. So another 2 wide receivers that are very fun and should be owned in your fantasy leagues. Moving on to number 6, DK Metcalf, a young player, another rookie wide receiver that had a great week 1. Here's the thing: Metcalf didn't explode onto the scene. He didn't have 2 receiving touchdowns for 100+ yards. But the way that he was used within the Seahawks offense is promising. Tyler Lockett had 2 targets, 1 reception, 44 yards, and a touchdown. Sure, Tyler Lockett's box score in terms of fantasy production, 10+ points, that looks great. But DK Metcalf getting those 6 targets, getting those 4 receptions for 89 receiving yards is just as valuable to me in fantasy. Seeing as that DK Metcalf is going to be targeted as much. Do I have the stat here? Yeah, DK Metcalf played 77% of wide receiver snaps on Sunday's game against the Bengals. That is very good. For the number 2 wide receiver, potentially moving into that number 1 wide receiver spot, playing on the outside, it's exciting. DK Metcalf, if he can continue to be a serviceable wide receiver as such, in fantasy purposes, I usually see rookie wide receivers as inconsistent, but week 1, they balled out. They absolutely did. And DK Metcalf, in an offense that likes to throw the ball, yes, they struggled on Sunday, but they'll get into their rhythm. That's for certain. So DK, number 6. All right, moving on to number 7, Terry McLaurin, a guy that really wasn't on my radar. I don't know whose radar he was on. Wow. Case Keenum came out and balled out. This offense for the Redskins looked incredible for the entire first half. They murked the Eagles secondary. Just wait till Matt Ryan, Julio Jones, and Hooper and Ridley, they get after those Eagles secondary. I'm telling you, they're going to murk them. But holy moly, Keenum played fantastic. Terry McLaurin took the top off of the respecting defense and was a great fantasy contributor this week. A guy that really I did not even know, just came out of nowhere. But I'm sure as hell happy to put him on my bench or potentially even start him in the future. What does week 2 hold for, let me see here. What does week 2 hold for the Washington Redskins? That's week 1. Week 2 is against the Cowboys at home. Very interesting. That's going to be a tough matchup, I'm going to be honest. But there could still be some potential for this guy to get, if he gets continued targets as he has, 7+ targets, that's very exciting. And I like the prospect of that. And the way that the offensive line played, the way that Keenum played, if they can establish a run game, this offense will just, will be even better. Moving on to number 8, 2 more wide receivers, both on the same team, Chris Conley and DJ Chark. Here's the thing. Chark caught his touchdown from Foles early in the game, and on the same play, Foles broke his clavicle on the left side, so he is on the injured reserve. Minshew, the rookie, Gardner Minshew, came in the game and was fantastic. I think he broke a record. He had an 88% completion percentage. The first player in NFL history to do that with 15 or less passing attempts, something of that sort. I don't know exactly. I think that was a stat that I read. The way I see it, D.D. Westbrook's still going to be the number 1 wide receiver of this team. Chris Conley was heavily targeted when Minshew was in. Chark was heavily used when, Nick Foles was in. Who is going to get the fair share of it? I think if Conley is one of his favorite targets, that's a good idea. But both these guys could have the potential. So if you have an extra available spot and you just want to throw away a player, you aren't happy with Geronimo Allison's week, a guy like this could be a decent grab. I don't know who is going to be the starting quarterback of that team going forward. We're hoping it's Minshew, but we'll get into that in a little bit. But those are the last 2 names I wanted to mention in terms of wide receivers. A lot of talent, guys, a lot of it. And hopefully they're not already owned, so you can go pick them up and grab them off waivers. Let's talk about the next position on my waiver wire targets on today's episode, the quarterback position. Going into week 2, we're looking for matchups. We're looking for guys that are going to be able to contribute for you going into a matchup that is more favorable. And hopefully these guys aren't owned in your respective leagues. Potentially aren't. I was looking at how much they're owned, and they're not very... they're not targeted very often, especially in drafts. Josh Allen, number 1. The thought process behind it, he was awful. 2 interceptions, fumbled the ball twice, and still managed to get 2 touchdowns and win the game. That being said, you're going against the New York Giants, who just got completely demolished by the Cowboys. Now, I'm not saying that Josh Allen has the potential to play like Dak did. He certainly can't. But in terms of fantasy value, Josh Allen does have a potential to be able to pick apart this defense and have a good week here. So that's a guy that, if you're looking to replace your quarterback, potentially you had Big Ben, potentially you had Jameis Winston, and there was a bunch of Cam Newton was the living shits. There were a lot of really quarterbacks and questionable. Jimmy G was a lot of guys, and there was a bunch of guys that were great. So Josh Allen, a guy that was in that middle of the pack this past week, and into a good matchup in week 2. I don't mind that. Moving into my number 2 quarterback suggestion, Matthew Stafford. Plain and simple, the Lions want to pass the ball. They threw the ball 45 times, guys. And I don't think that's changing. We thought that they could potentially be a run-first team. That's obviously not the case. Matthew Stafford looked great. He utilized all of his receiving targets, whether it was Jones, Golladay, Hockenson, and Amendola, very effectively. And going into their week 2 matchup, gosh dang it, I gotta pull my schedule up on the thing, but I gotta put this on the wall. They play against the Chargers. To be honest, Chargers, not a bad matchup for Matthew Stafford. I'm sure he's going to be able to pass the ball just as well as Jacoby Brissett, if not better. So that should be a good matchup for them. So Stafford, a guy in week 2 that I don't mind. Again, I've been saying it all offseason. Stafford was extremely undervalued last year. He did not have offensive weapons surrounding him. He was injured. Hopefully we can see the return of a top 12 kind of Matthew Stafford going forward. Number 3, Andy Dalton, Mr. September. He really is. He's been great in his career in the month of September. If you want to ride him out, you absolutely can. It's not going to, I don't know. It's going to be sketchy, I think, to an extent, but they do play against the San Francisco 49ers. Sure, Andy Dalton has made mistakes in the past, throwing interceptions, but I don't think he'll be as bad as Jameis was, throwing 2 pick sixes. So as of right now, Playing against the 49ers at home for the Bengals, not a bad matchup for Andy Dalton. Number 4, Derek Carr. Have not seen him play. This was a recording before the Monday night games. Derek Carr against the Kansas City Chiefs in week 2, not a bad matchup. Minshew was able to tear them apart. I understand that there's no AB, but if they can go ahead and find some rhythm there with Tyrell Williams, Darren Waller, Hunter Renfrow, JJ Nelson, something like that. And Josh Jacobs out of the backfield, Jalen Richard. Hopefully they could figure something out. The last quarterback I really wanted to mention, Marcus Mariota. Incredible week 1 performance for that entire team, up and down the board. A guy that really, he didn't personally play well in terms of his accuracy, 14 for 24, but was able to find himself 3 touchdowns, which were great. If, in fact, this team is no joke and they continue to roll over teams, why not? Marcus Mariota, another guy that you could potentially start against the Colts at home this coming Sunday. Moving on to the tight end position targets that I really want you guys to look out for. Number 1 is Mark Andrews. Holy crap, right? I mean, it's insane how Mark Andrews, even in garbage time, because there really wasn't a garbage time, they put their foot on the throat of the Dolphins, and they sent the league a message almost saying, like, we're no joke. We're going to pass the crap out of the ball. We're going to run the crap out of the ball. We're going to play great defense, and we're just going to make your life a living hell. Mark Andrews, 20 fantasy points and half PPR. Incredible game. I think was, the number 2 tight end just behind Ingram this week. Wow, a great performance all in all. Good amount of targets, 8 targets, I think 8 receptions, over 100 yards. It's a great week, plain and simple. There's nothing else to talk about it. It's incredible. Moving on to number 2, another young tight end, wide receiver. He might as well be a wide receiver at this point. Hockenson, over 100 receiving yards, a touchdown. Holy crap, is he the Gronk of this team or what? I mean, that's what it's looking like. They really like Hockenson, and Stafford has found a pretty good connection with him there. I mean, Hockenson and Amendola were the 2 top receivers. Golladay and Marvin Jones were pretty much forgotten, even with the top 2 corners of the Cardinals gone. Hockenson, I mean, moving forward against the Chargers this coming week, Eric Ebron didn't play bad. He dropped a touchdown, bobbled in the end zone. Hockenson could go ahead and find himself another good week. Number 3, Austin Hooper. Again, guys, he was the number 6 tight end last year. Found some good production this week. Was the number 1 receiver of the Falcons this week in terms of yardage. A guy that really, he's not very much respected in fantasy, but he can get the job done in terms of the landscape. And I think playing against the Vikings defense in a very bad overall performance for the Falcons offense, at least Austin Hooper showed that he can still be of service for fantasy owners, and I think he should be rewarded and picked up for that, because going against the Eagles this coming week should be another good matchup for him. Moving on to number 4, a guy that literally hurdled over Eagles. If in fact Jordan Reed is out in week 2, maybe he does not pass concussion protocol. Maybe it's worse than we thought. Vernon Davis, a guy that consistently, every time Jordan Reed is out, somehow manages to just be great in fantasy. Had a good week, scored a touchdown, good targets. All in all, a good tight end. Moving on, my last tight end I wanted to mention this week, Greg Olsen. Now, he didn't play well in week 1, and he's probably not owned in your league. There were tight ends that dropped goose eggs, Kyle Rudolph. There are guys that are Greg Olsen that sure had some targets here and there and weren't great, but he plays against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Greg Olsen, if in fact he can go ahead and find himself a couple targets, the way that George Kittle was completely destroying that defense, it was literally only because of penalties that got called back. Kittle would have been a 20-point, maybe even the best tight end yesterday for this past week. But because of a couple penalties here and there, his point production definitely took a hit. Olsen could go ahead and exploit that and find some value. Just my thought process. Anyway, let's go ahead and let's talk about the defensive waiver wire targets for this week. 4 teams that were good in week 1 and should continue to be good in week 2. Number 1 is the Patriots. If they're not owned in your league, I don't understand how. In the defensive video that I made this offseason, talking about defenses to target, in terms of when you draft your defense in the last round, who you should grab. I did mention the Patriots and the Seahawks. These are two teams that in the last two seasons, in 2017 and 2018 in fantasy football, have both been in the top 12 of defenses in terms of scoring fantasy points. These are two consistent defenses, and that's why I have them as my number 1 and 2. Patriots play against the Miami Dolphins. That's going to be we know that it's just going to be maybe the Miami Dolphins break the record for most points scored against them in the first 2 weeks in NFL history. I'm not even kidding. It's possible. And the Patriots defense are going to help that for sure. Moving on to number 2, like I mentioned, the Seahawks. Here's the thing. They may have struggled, but they did play tough. There was some promising plays there for the Seattle Seahawks. They get to play against the team that the Patriots just battered. I mean, the Patriots exposed the Pittsburgh Steelers, tenfold. Seattle could go ahead, watch film, do exactly the same. If, in fact, you continue to just double team Juju and stop the run, there's no other playmakers on that team. On top of that, number 3, Carolina Panthers playing against Tampa Bay. If Jameis Winston just wants to be bad at football, I mean, he really is bad at football. The plays that he makes looks so awful. The forced throws, it's unbelievable. The inaccuracy. If this defense for the Carolina Panthers cannot expose him, I'll be surprised because they did look good at times against Jared Goff. So they could figure that out, especially because really the offensive line for that Tampa Bay team, not great. And the running game, not established. So if you're going to force him to pass and you can stop that, there's always a chance. The last thing I wanted to mention, Houston Texans have not played in week 1. It's probably going to be a shootout this coming week, but in week 2, they play against the Jaguars. If Gardner Minshew, Josh Dobbs is the starting quarterback, these guys are rookies. They're inexperienced. The Texans could go in and expose one of them and make their life a living hell. So that's another one that, if it's not owned already, which probably isn't because people don't want to play them against the Saints in week 1, you should go ahead and target. So those are all the targets that I wanted to mention for week 1. Now that we have finished that, wow, that took some time. I told you guys it was going to take a while. I wanted to go ahead and talk about all 28 teams that played from Thursday and Sunday, and I want to go ahead and explain to you what I learned from week 1 from every single team, a little tidbits that we can take away going through the rest of the season. Really quickly, a couple stats I wanted to mention. Week 1 snap counts. McLaurin played 93% of offensive snaps. Crowder, 90%. John Brown, 86%. John Ross, 82%. Mecole Hardman, 78%. Another waiver wire target. Chris Conley, 76%. DK Metcalf, 77%. DJ Chark, 71%. DeMarcus Robinson for the Kansas City Chiefs, 63%. Amendola, 53%. AJ Brown, 43%. Marquise Brown only played 18%. Yeah, not great. Just keep that in mind. Other stats, before we talk about the lessons that we learned. Guys, if you are panicking because somebody didn't play well, maybe you had Devontae Freeman this past week, maybe you had Aaron Jones, maybe you had Montgomery, don't panic. This happens every single year. A couple examples. Last season in fantasy football, in week 1, Travis Kelce scored 1 point. Last season, that's correct. Kareem Hunt scored 4.9 fantasy points. Calvin Ridley scored 0 fantasy points. Matt Ryan scored 8.8 fantasy points. But guess what? In week 1 of last season, Will Disley had 16.5. Kenny Stills had 24.6. Isaiah Crowell had 22 points in week 1 of last season. And Tyrod Taylor had 23.6 points in fantasy of week 1 in 2018. Don't panic. It's only 1 week. Everybody relax. Don't over-exaggerate. It is over-exaggeration Monday where everyone begins to panic and tries to trade and tries to drop players. And listen, relax. All will be fine. All will be fine. Now, let's talk about what I learned, little tidbits we can take away. Packers offense. Number 1, listen, the passing game will get there. My biggest concern is the running game. If Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams continue to go back and forth on series, Aaron Jones is going to not have much fantasy value. That's going to hurt him. But that could just be for pass blocking purposes or receiving purposes. But really, if they continue to switch off every drive, every series, that's not great, and that's concerning. Moving on. A little tidbit that we could take away from the Bears game. That backfield is an RBBC. It is a running back by committee. Really, Tariq Cohen is a slot receiver at this point. So PPR, sure, absolutely. We got to get him in there. He's being used heavily. But, Davis and Montgomery, that's sketch. Really, unless Montgomery can have one performance that blows away Davis, it's going to be an RBBC for some time now. Chiefs, thing that we can take away. Hill's injured for a good amount of time. Watkins having a 40-point game in week 1, 198 receiving yards and 3 receiving touchdowns. If Sammy Watkins scored 40 points in 5 weeks, I would have been happy. The dude did it in 1 week. He did it in 1 week. If he did it in 5, I would have been satisfied. He did it in 1 week. Things to take away. The offense looks great. Patrick Mahomes is a little banged up, his little ankle injury, but still, we have to find the next wide receiver. Is it Demarcus Robinson or is it Mecole Hardman? That's the question for week 2. You play against the Raiders. It could just be about anybody. Another thing we can take away, the running back situation. Damian Williams played 65% of snaps. McCoy played 29% of snaps. And the thing was, McCoy had just as many rushes or almost just as many rushes as Damian Williams. Damian Williams had the receiving threat, had the receiving touchdown, but LaShawn McCoy looked really good on the ground. Almost had about 9-10 yards per carry, so that was great. So that backfield, it's a little tricky there. You might see a split there. Two-headed monster kind of scheme. Moving on to the Jaguars. Leonard Fournette played 86% of offensive snaps. Had 93% of the running back carries and had 86% of the running back targets. That's exactly what we want to see. Stay on the field, get the opportunity, and eventually you'll find success. I'm okay with what he did this last week. In terms of the play calling, the negative game script does not help Leonard Fournette. And to be honest, I did not see him really, he didn't get much work in the passing game, but hopefully he can get a little bit more going forward because he needs to find the end zone to be successful in fantasy. Moving on to the Falcons. All I have for notes, offensive line, question mark. Are they even good? I mean, what's the point of drafting 2 first-round offensive linemen if they're going to be bad? Sure, it's for the future, but your future is now. You have one of the most talented teams you've had in years, and yet you still can't do anything. Matt Ryan, decision-making, question mark. Very poor. I don't know what happens to Matt Ryan at times. Week 1s have not been good for him. Moving on. Austin Hooper. Is he legit? Question mark. Perhaps. Only time will tell. And the running game. Is Devontae Freeman just the worst? Does it even matter? Because it seemed like he was hurt. He didn't even, 9 carries for 18 yards? That's a joke. I understand the Vikings are monsters, but even Ito Smith had a 5-yard per carry average. What the hello? I mean, and on top of it, you went and fumbled the ball. Yikes, that running game is, that's tricky. Vikings, they blew out the Falcons by throwing the ball 10 times. They threw the ball 10 times. 8 for 10, 98 yards and a touchdown. That's what Kirk Cousins did. That's what he did. The receiving options, worthless. Dalvin Cook, monster. Destroyed that defense. Alexander Madison even destroyed that defense because of game script. You might as well put in your RB2. They look good. Moving on. The defense and Cook, man. The Titans. Whoo! I mean, Delaney Walker said it. If you want to crown them, crown them. And the entire offseason has been about, are the Browns legit? And, the Titans came out and smacked them upside the head. They smacked me upside the head. Mariota and Delaney Walker, that combination's back for sure. Derrick Henry, my goodness, did they send a message? Loud and clear. Understand. That's loud and clear. And then the defense. Just when you think Baker Mayfield at home against that defense is set and ready to go, the guy throws 3 picks. Yikes. Terrible decision making. Terrible offensive line play from the Browns. That just kudos to the Titans as a whole. Their entire team, great game. 40 bomb. They dropped a 40 bomb on the Browns. Great job. Going to the Browns, but talking about them. Chubb got the goal line work stolen from Hilliard. that is what the hell are we doing? Really? Why? I mean, Greg Robinson threw a kick, got suspended. Myles Garrett threw a punch, should have been suspended. He punched Delaney Walker square in the face, in the face mask. Where's that suspension? The Browns are in. I mean, I think it's the best thing for them. You get smacked up week 1, you learn your lesson, and then you got to move on. You got to get better. So, moving on to the Bills. Singletary, like I mentioned, played 48 of 69 offensive snaps. Was great. Josh Allen and John Brown. That's the combination you're looking for. Josh Allen needs to learn to not turn over the ball. Otherwise, he's going to be Blake Bortles. He throws the ball away a bunch in the early game and then finds garbage time later to figure it out and try to balance his scoring. You got to stop turning over the ball, young guy. Moving on to the Jets. Like I mentioned earlier, Crowder with 14 receptions. Bell got some work in the passing game. Bell, in terms of running the ball, only 3.5 yards per carry average. Not great, but it doesn't matter. You got past game 1. You looked good. All in all, 17 rushing attempts, 5 receptions. That's a great workload for a premier running back as such. And he played all offensive snaps. He played all 70-something offensive snaps, Bell did. So that's very good. Moving on, Ravens. I mean, wow. That's all I can say. Wow. Jackson, wow. Mark Ingram, great. Marquise Brown, wow. Mark Andrews, great. Defense, wow. That's it. Done. Plain and simple. Gus Edwards got more touches than Justice Hill, so that's going to go ahead and take precedent going into the future. But all in all, good game there. Moving on, the Dolphins. Rest in peace. This is the moment of silence that we're going to have really quickly for the Dolphins and their 2019 hopes. Go ahead, everybody, take a moment. Thank you. Okay, so now that we've taken time out of the Dolphins, out of the day to kind of send our condolences that way, the Dolphins, after the game, many of their players got on the phone, talked to their agents, said, we want to be traded. We're not willing to tank and lose by 49 points on a weekly basis. We're not doing that anymore. So there's going to be some shakeups. Probably players get traded soon. Xavier Howard probably don't want to be there. But these are just rumors for now, and we'll see what happens in the next coming weeks in terms of what happens to that defense, that offense, and who leaves and who joins. So we'll see. Moving on. The Redskins, like I mentioned, Case Keenum, exclamation point, great. Geis injured again? Question mark. That's not great. But all in all, this looks like a throwing offense, and if they're going to continue to throw the ball and Gruden's going to lead them with a pretty good offensive game plan, I mean, that's just props to the coaching staff. They really came out and played well in week 1. Hopefully can continue going into week 2. Moving on, the Eagles. The secondary was, Ronald Darby's supposed to be good. Worthless. Malcolm Jacobs, worthless. What are we doing? The secondary was awful. Got completely just battered. But thanks to, Wentz, Jackson, and Alshon, they figured it out. Sanders is the lead back of this team. He had 36 of 75 snaps, while Sproles had 23 of 75, and Jordan Howard had 17 of 75. Miles Sanders tied Darren Sproles in touches. But the issue was Miles Sanders' rushing touchdown was called back. That's going to hurt fantasy owners, and if you didn't know that, if you didn't know it got called back, then you're probably cursing me out saying, Andrew, why did you tell me? Should have been there. Should have had that touchdown. It's unfortunate. Should have been a 10-point play this week. But it is what it is. Moving on to the Rams. Gurley is probably, I don't know. He's probably injured. I don't know. But he didn't look bad. I think it's just they're being cautious. If that's going to be the case, then 100 yards on, very minimal carries, I don't mind it. I'm going to play this guy. I'm going to play him. Sure, many of you got him in the second and third round. That's a blessing in disguise. So, all in all, not bad there. In Goff looked okay. Yikes at sometimes, like, oof, what the heck was that? Inaccurate interceptions. You got to find the rhythm. They play the Saints next week, or this coming week, and it's going to be, that's the revenge game. We'll see how that goes. Moving on. Panthers, this is the first time in Cam Newton's career that he's ever had negative rushing yards in the game. First time in his career. Didn't move the ball. I don't know if it's his ankle. But Christian McCaffrey just ran this offense, plain and simple. Christian McCaffrey is incredible, 37.9 fantasy points in half PPR. 10 receptions, 80 some odd receiving yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, oh my God, McCaffrey. Unstoppable. It hurts that McCaffrey's the only one scoring on this offense, but all in all, hopefully the Panthers will get back on track against the Buccaneers defense on a short week on Thursday. The Colts, Marlon Mack, great. T.Y. Hilton, great. Ebron dropped a touchdown, but should have been great. All in all, this offense doesn't look that bad. It is not as concerning, and that's absolutely fantastic for fantasy owners. Chargers, Eckler played 48 of 64 offensive snaps, while DeSean Jackson played the remaining 16 of 64 offensive snaps. 48 of 64. Let me see this percentage really quickly, because off the top of my head, Andrew's not a mathematician as such. That's 75%. Yeah, like I was mentioning, it's like an 80-20. No, it's a 75-25. I'm telling you, they're going to scale it back. They cannot make Austin Eckler get hit this many times in a game. If he can sustain it, sure, but I don't think he'll be able to for very long. Bengals, King of September is Andy Dalton. Is Mixon going to be healthy? John Ross, welcome to the NFL. Really, this is your real welcome. In your third year, welcome to the NFL. Mixon, yeah, we'll figure that out. All in all, that team looked good. Offensive line was fine. Defense was a lot better than anticipated. Speaking of their defense, the Seahawks struggled heavily. Tyler Lockett, only 2 targets. What happened to being the Doug Baldwin role of the team? Pete Carroll, what happened to that? Rashad Penny, really? You're not going to use him at all? Okay, cool. So I guess we can he's a handcuff. That's it. Metcalf and Carson, that's the offense. Metcalf, Carson, and Russell Wilson scrambling. That's the offense. Thank you very much. At least we know for certain now. Moving on. Giants, they don't know how to play defense. They're running cover 2, and there's no safety over the middle, and everyone's just letting Randall Cobb, Michael Gallup, and Amari Cooper just dominate. And that's absolutely fantastic. Zeke didn't get much work. Like I mentioned on the live stream, the guy's not going to touch as many balls in the first week because he's not in game shape. You got to get in game shape. You could be in regular shape, but game shape's something different. Week 2 should be way better against the Redskins. Should be fine. The Cowboys, it's insane. Their offensive line looked really good too. But for the Giants, the main takeaway, why did Wayne Gallman get to play in the second half? Why did he almost have as much points as Saquon Barkley? Why not give Saquon Barkley the ball when he's averaging almost 8 yards per carry? Evan Ingram looked fantastic. Sterling Shepard could produce. That's okay. But getting blown out early, the game script, and having to put in the rookie quarterback, so that's just that hurts. 49er takeaways. Garoppolo's garbage. Breida and Coleman are hurt. Always. Just injuries galore. Kittle gets his touchdowns called back, and Dante Pettis played 2 offensive snaps. Literally played 2 offensive snaps. It's worse than we thought, guys. It's worse than we thought. Buccaneers. Jameis Winston is bad at football. ... That's what I put. Done. Moving on. You have Mike Evans and you have Chris Godwin, and Mike Evans grabbed the ball twice in a game. Twice. He had 2 catches. Okay? Chris Godwin had 3 catches. So there was 5 grabs. Where did the ball go? It's so confusing. The Lions are a passing team. Kerryon Johnson had 18 total touches. If you cannot produce on that, then you don't deserve to touch the ball 18 times. Plain and simple. But otherwise, the Lions threw the ball 45 times. They ran the ball nearly 30 times. So all in all, This offense, it's getting more of a balanced look, but they passed the ball a crap ton the other day. Yesterday. Cardinals. All right, couple stats I wanted to read. David Johnson lined up at the wide receiver position 15 times in week 1. He only lined up at the wide receiver position 16 times all of last season. Yeah, we're going to take David Johnson and one of his most underrated things, and the thing that a lot of people ignore, his receiving ability. We're going to make him a wide receiver because the Cardinals were in the 4+ wide receiver formations 45 plays in week 1. The entire rest of the NFL on Sunday only went into 4 wide situations, 35 plays. The Cardinals were in 4 wide, 45 plays. In the entire rest of the NFL, 35 plays. Puts in perspective. Steelers, no offensive playmakers. If you double Juju and stop Connor, they lose. That's the biggest takeaway. Patriots, Super Bowl favorites. I feel bad for Miami, especially now that Antonio Brown comes back. All in all, and that backfield, that's Sony Michel, man. Yikes. Those are the takeaways, guys. Those are the takeaways. Hope everybody enjoyed watching. That was a long episode, 55 minutes. Thank you again, everybody, for watching. Much appreciated. If you like this video, click that like button. Subscribe to the channel. Until next time, which will be tomorrow, running back rankings. I will see you guys. Have a nice Monday. Hopefully, you guys can capture some W's in week 1 from tonight's game. The Saints and the Texans should be fun. And hopefully the Broncos and the Raiders could make something competitive occur. Hopefully. It's going to be probably a one-sided affair, but hopefully the Raiders can hold strong. But anyway, thank you everybody for watching. Until tomorrow, I will see you guys. So thanks again. See you guys. Peace.